In this video, we'll look at two different methods to manage users in AppNeta. The first method is to create and manage users within the AppNeta user interface. For AppNeta SaaS, users created within the AppNeta user interface are tied to a Broadcom Cloud user account. Once a user is added to AppNeta, they may then use their Broadcom Cloud account to access AppNeta, the Broadcom support portal, and any other Broadcom Cloud applications they are entitled to. For AppNeta On-Prem, users created within the AppNeta UI remain separate from all other Broadcom applications and are managed entirely within AppNeta On-Prem. The second method is to set up single sign-on so that users may sign into AppNeta using their corporate credentials. SSO allows application administrators to centrally manage user credentials. User provisioning and role assignment can then be automated, and users do not need to remember another set of credentials. Both AppNeta SaaS and AppNeta On-Prem support SAML 2.0 as a method to enable single sign-on for user authentication. Coordination with Broadcom support is required to set up SSO. Let's take a look at the available user roles. Then we'll go through how to create users in the AppNeta user interface and the procedure for working with Broadcom support to set up SSO. A user role in AppNeta determines which actions a user is permitted to perform either within the AppNeta user interface or when using the AppNeta API. There are 4 user roles that allow users different levels of access, plus a 5th role that allows customization for different areas of the product. These roles are Organization Admin, Advanced, Standard, View Only, and Custom. Organization Admin users are the only users who can create and manage users, create child organizations, and manage organization-wide settings such as configuring a monitoring point deletion policy. Organization admins can also add and manage monitoring points, configure monitoring, manage alert profiles, and view all monitoring results. Advanced users can also manage monitoring points, configure monitoring, manage alert profiles, and view all monitoring results, but they cannot manage users or adjust any organization-wide settings. Standard users can configure monitoring, manage alert profiles, and view all monitoring results within AppNeta. View-only users are only allowed to view monitoring results and do not have permission to change any configurations. While the other 4 roles give a user the same level of access to delivery, experience, and usage, the custom user role allows for a user to have different roles for each of the different product areas. The custom role could be given to users who need to view network and web app performance results in delivery and experience, but should not be permitted to view network traffic analysis data in usage. There are also a few add-on privileges that can be enabled for any user. The Advanced Diagnostics permission adds the ability to display certain data within network path diagnostic test results that would normally be hidden. For example, if the results we found were inconsistent. We recommend only providing this permission to advanced AppNeta users who are familiar with diagnostic interpretation. The Path Test permission adds the ability to use a powerful load generation tool in delivery. With Path Test, it is possible to measure the network capacity between 2 endpoints on a LAN or WAN link and analyze the behavior of a network under different traffic loads. And the Embeddable Session Login add-on gives a user permission to embed their entire session into an external web application. It is important to understand the risk of embeddable sessions and that AppNeta will run in a less secure state, leaving it vulnerable to framing attacks. A 4th add-on is available to users in AppNeta On-Prem. The System Config permission provides a user with access to the AppNeta On-Prem Admin API and to configure system options such as an email server or to enable and disable the remote maintenance tunnel. Next, let's walk through how to create a new user in the AppNeta user interface. From the main Settings menu, select Manage Users. This page is only available to organization admins. We can now see a list of all the users that have access to the selected organization. We can also see additional information including their user ID, the organizations they have access to, their name and email address, their user role, add-on privileges, and any comments about the user. To create a new user, click the Add User button. Then, we must fill out the required information. Add an email address. Then, select a role, and the UI will provide a reminder definition of the role and its access. If there are multiple organizations, we can select one or more organizations the user will have access to. The user will then have the same role in all organizations that we selected above. Next, we can select any add-on permissions. Add a first and last name, and optional items include adding a phone number, and we can also optionally change the email address used for notification emails. Lastly, we have the option to add a text string to the comments field, which will be included in the user list. Then, click the Create User button. For users of AppNeta SaaS, a Broadcom Cloud user account will be created if one does not already exist, and the user will receive a welcome email. New Broadcom Cloud user accounts will have a limited time to activate their account and set a password. After activating their account, the user can log into AppNeta with their Broadcom user credentials. When creating users in AppNeta on-prem, you'll also add an initial password during user setup. When the AppNeta user account is created, the user will receive a welcome email, provided AppNeta on-prem is configured to use an email server to send emails. They can then log into AppNeta on-prem with the user ID and initial password. The user will be prompted to change their password the first time they log in. To update a user, we can go to the Action menu for that user and click on Configure to bring us to the Configure User page. Now that we've covered how to create users within the AppNeta UI, let's have a look at Single Sign-On for user management. When AppNeta is configured to use Single Sign-On, a user accesses AppNeta and will then be prompted to provide their email address. Then, Broadcom, using Okta as the service provider for SAML authentication, sends a request to your identity provider to authenticate the user. The request is relayed to the identity provider by the browser. If the user is not already authenticated, the identity provider will prompt the user to log in. When the user is authenticated, the identity provider sends a response with the information needed to determine whether to permit the user access to AppNeta. If the user should have access, they are permitted access to AppNeta with the appropriate user role. Coordination with Broadcom support is required to set up SSO. Coordinating with support requires opening a support ticket. Before opening a ticket, we recommend that you identify your corporate identity provider and its administrator, confirm your identity provider is SAML 2.0 compliant, and ask your administrator to generate a SAML metadata file for your identity provider. You should also identify which AppNeta organizations will use single sign-on, and choose a keyword to use for a custom AppNeta sign-on URL. The keyword is typically the company name. Then, once you have gathered the necessary information, and your IDP admin has provided the SAML IDP metadata, open a ticket with Broadcom support and include whether you use AppNeta SaaS or AppNeta on-prem, which organizations should be configured to use single sign-on, the keyword you chose for your custom login URL, and the SAML metadata file for your identity provider. Broadcom will provide the AppNeta SAML SP metadata file to register AppNeta as a service provider. Your identity provider administrator should then map the correct attributes to the properties that AppNeta expects. Name ID and email should both be the email address. First name and last name are the user's first and last name. Groups is used to map security groups from the identity provider to use roles in AppNeta. Finally, an AppNeta organization admin user should log in to finish the configuration and map groups to user roles. To finish the configuration in AppNeta, navigate to the Gear menu, then Manage Identity Provider. For the identity provider you want to edit, go to the Action menu, then select Edit. The description field is optional. Choose SPS Portal for the provider unless instructed otherwise by Broadcom support. In the Organization field, select the organizations that SSO users should have access to. If organization admin users are provided access to a parent organization, they will have access to all child organizations by default. Use the role mapping field to map security groups in the IDP to user roles within AppNeta. Add the full name of each security group and map each group to a user role, and where appropriate, to an add-on role. A few things to keep in mind are that all users that log in via SSO must belong to a group mapped to an AppNeta user role. All mapped groups will have access to the selected organizations. And for AppNeta On-Prem, if there is a firewall between the AppNeta On-Prem server and the Okta SAML service provider, open port 443 on the firewall between the server and Okta. Once SSO is enabled, additional role mapping can be added. Then, once roles are mapped, notify Broadcom support on the ticket and they will enable SSO for testing. Organization admin users have access to disable and re-enable SSO within the AppNeta user interface as needed. Once single sign-on is enabled, AppNeta SaaS users can access AppNeta at signon.pm.appneta.com and log in with their Broadcom credentials. AppNeta on-prem users can access AppNeta via the custom single sign-on URL, which uses the SSO keyword provided to Broadcom support. This concludes our video demonstration of how to create and manage new users and the roles that permit them to engage with AppNeta.